All right, today we're jumping into a really fascinating and honestly pretty complex story. We're talking about the groups known as the Black Hebrew Israelites. It's a journey that's all about faith and identity, and it stretches across continents and right into the modern day.
So, what's the game plan? First, we're going to figure out what that term even means. Then, we'll follow one specific group's incredible trek to Jerusalem. After that, we'll zoom out and see just how different these groups can be. That'll lead us into the big debate. Is this all about ancestry, or is it about theology? And we'll wrap up by thinking about the deep questions of identity that this whole story brings up.
Okay, first things first. What are we actually talking about when we say Black Hebrew Israelites? The key thing to know right off the bat is that this is an umbrella term. It's not one single, simple thing.
So get this, the one symbol characteristic that links all these different groups is their belief that they are descended from the ancient biblical Israelites. That's the common thread. Beyond that claim to ancestry, things can get really, really different. Yeah, this is probably the most important point to get right from the start. We are not talking about a single movement or one big organization. It's much better to think of Black Hebrew Israelites as a broad category that holds a whole bunch of separate, independent communities. Each one has its own story, its own rules, and its own beliefs.
So, to really get a feel for how these beliefs play out in the real world, let's zoom in on the story of one of the most well-known groups. They're called the original African Hebrew Israelite nation of Jerusalem. And their story? It's pretty remarkable.
The origin story for this group, let's call them the OHINJ for short, is really compelling. They believe that their ancestors were ancient Israelites who fled after the Romans conquered Jerusalem. They say these ancestors migrated to West Africa, and then, centuries later, their descendants were captured and brought to the United States as part of the transatlantic slave trade. So for them, it's a direct line from ancient Israel through West Africa to America.
And what kicked off their modern journey? A divine vision. Seriously, in 1966, the group's founder, Ben Ami, who was a former bus driver in Chicago, said that the angel Gabriel appeared to him with this exact command. And that one moment was the spark that set their incredible migration in motion.
So this vision wasn't just a thought. It sparked a literal physical exodus. They left Chicago and first went to Liberia in West Africa for what they called a period of purification. Then, starting in '69, they began moving to Israel. It was a really long process, but eventually, in 2004, the community was granted official residency. Now, that's an important detail. Residency, not full Israeli citizenship.
And he really built something there. We're talking about a community of about 2,500 people by 2008, mostly living in the desert town of Dimona.
And life in this community is, well, it's very distinct. It's all guided by their unique take on the laws from the Old Testament. This includes some really strict dietary rules and, interestingly, a commitment to veganism for the whole community.
Okay, but, and this is a huge but, that's just one group's story. It is so important to remember they don't speak for everyone under that Black Hebrew Israelite label. So now, let's pull the camera back and look at the bigger, more complicated picture.
And wow, this chart really lays it all out, doesn't it? The sheer diversity here is staggering. On one side, you've got the African Hebrew Israelites we just talked about living as residents in Israel. Then, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have a group like the Nation of Yahweh, which is considered a black supremacist group. And then you have the Beta Israel of Ethiopia, who are fully recognized as Jewish by the State of Israel and get full citizenship. I mean, you couldn't find three more different groups.
And believe it or not, that's just scratching the surface. There are other groups like the Church of God and Saints of Christ and the Commandment Keepers. The list goes on. Each one has its own spin on things, which really just hammers home that point again. This is not a monolith.
Okay, so all this diversity naturally leads us to the heart of the debate, right? It's this constant tension between claims of ancestry on one side and theological beliefs on the other. What really defines these groups?
So it really makes you wonder, what's the most important thing to focus on here? Is it all about the bloodline? Is the main issue trying to prove a direct genetic link back to the ancient Israelites?
And look, we have to be clear here. The general idea of Jewish communities in Africa isn't some crazy, out-there concept. Not at all. I mean, you just look at a map and you think about historical migrations. It's considered totally plausible. So the question isn't, can there be Black Jews? The answer to that is a clear yes. Just look at the Beta Israel community. The real debate, the much more contested question is this: are these specific American-founded groups direct descendants of the biblical Hebrews? That's where things get tricky.
But then, the whole argument takes a really interesting turn. The sources we're looking at suggest that maybe, just maybe, we're all hyper-focused on the wrong thing. What if it's not about genetics at all? What if the thing that truly matters is what these groups actually believe?
And from that theological viewpoint, the sources point to what they call a crucial error. The argument is that many of these groups hold beliefs that just don't line up with mainstream Christianity or Judaism. And the biggest sticking point, according to this perspective, is how they see Jesus Christ and his role in salvation.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground here. History, migration, belief, controversy. So after all that, what are the big takeaways? What should you really remember from all of this?
Okay, let's recap. First, Black Hebrew Israelites is a super diverse umbrella term, not one single thing. We followed the incredible journey of one community all the way from the US to Israel. We saw the huge range of beliefs, from peaceful vegans to extremist views. And we landed on that core debate. What defines you more, your bloodline or your beliefs?
And that really leaves us with a big, thought-provoking question, doesn't it? In these powerful stories of faith and searching, where does belief end and where does identity truly begin? It's a blurry line for sure, and it's a question that makes all of us think a little harder about how we define who we are.